I'm Eric from the Longbox Review.
I'm Peter from the Daily Rios, and this is Eric and Peter's Legion Project Podcast. Eric, we're back. Third episode.
Lucky number 3? No, wait, that's lucky something else. 3's something else. What is 3? What's the significance of 3, Peter?
3's company.
Legionnaires 3.
Well, true. Yeah, that's true.
Maybe that's what we should talk about today.
Well, this is the third episode of the Legion Project Podcast. Officially, we want to do our introductions. I'm Peter of the Daily Rios Podcast.
And I'm Eric from the Longbox Review Podcast.
And on this third episode, not only are we going to take a look at issue number 3 of the 1984 Legion of Superheroes Baxter run, but Eric and I came across an annual titled Legion of Superheroes Annual, and that happens to be annual number 3 as well. And it fits in a very interesting place, which we will talk about soon. So you are getting 2 issues for this episode, 2 for the price of 1. How about that?
Yeah, but now we're going away from the idea of the 3. We should have come up with something else, Peter. Another issue, maybe.
Oh.
That's too much.
Yeah. I'll have an issue with something, and then we can,
There we go.
There we go.
That's just it. I will too.
Oh, okay. Ooh, little tease.
A couple, maybe even a couple. Well, now we're getting back to the 2 thing. Anyway, I got to stop talking about numbers.
How about we give a shout out to the composer of our theme music? We want to give a special thanks to Rho, R-H-O. You can find links in the show notes to both the YouTube page and the Twitter. Hasn't produced anything new in quite a long time, but certainly love that theme song, and much special thanks for providing that, which is great.
Yeah, and like you said, that person has not composed anything new in a while, but I went and listened to everything that they had posted on YouTube, and it's all good stuff.
Yeah. Both Eric and I had the privilege of being on another podcast in the past. We recorded it a bunch of weeks back, and it was just released a little over a week ago. It is the George and Tony Entertainment Show, episode 192. And Eric, why don't you talk about the show since you're more familiar with it?
All right. And it's funny because George, in his show notes for that, put podcasting trinity. So there's the three aspect coming back again. But yeah, but I've been a frequent co-host, guest host on George's podcast. He usually does. It's a podcast about pop culture from George and Tony's point of view, but his normal co-host Tony has been away for an extended period, and so he has invited a bunch of different people to come in each and every week. I don't know how he does a weekly podcast, but he does. And I've been lucky enough to be on his show multiple times, and we have great conversations about comics and other things. And Peter and I were invited to come on, and George asked some really good questions, and we discussed a lot of different topics, which is always a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had quite a good time on that. I really appreciated the invite, and it was great to be on there with you and get to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff. So that was fun. That was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as we mentioned, since we are talking about 2 issues today, we're going to change up format a little bit, and we're going to jump right into the actual issues. And then if we have time at the end, we will do our typical preamble stuff, taking a look at any news or feedback, or any addendums from the previous episode. But we feel like we should just really jump in because we do have two books that we want to talk about. One more than the other, but we're gonna try to give our reasons why we are talking about said issues. So
it all depends on how much I talk.
I'll keep you going. It's late. It's 10:30. I got to get up.
I know.
6:30. Oh God.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. All good. I can take naps. So the first issue we're going to talk about, Legion of Superheroes, Annual number 3. And the reason why both of us sort of felt like we needed to talk about this for a number of reasons. First off, the inner content, the stuff actually in the book, will be self-explanatory. But it's a weird bridge between not only the Baxter run and the newsstand run, but also a bridge between consecutive issues within both formats. So if you read issue 1 of the Baxter run and issue 2 of the Baxter run, instead of going to issue 3 right away, you really need to read Legion of Superheroes Annual 3. And because Eric and I are reading issue by issue and we're not reading ahead, we could have given people a warning, last episode. But tell you the truth, it wasn't until we were done recording and then I went, and read on to issue 3 that I realized that this annual was in my collection around the same time, and I pulled it out and they were making references in the letter columns about it, and I read it and I said, wait a minute, this came out between issue 2 and 3. I have to read this. And then realized it's also a bridge between Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, the newsstand run, between issues 315 and 316. And yet it's labeled Legion of Superheroes, not Tales of the Legion, even though it's a newsprint format.
Yeah, that threw me when you told me about this annual. When we were just deciding if we're going to discuss it or not, I was, I had it in my collection, but it really confused me because I have at least 2 Legion of Superhero Annual number 3s, and I pulled out the wrong one initially, and so I found this one. I'm like, wait a minute, this says Legion of Superheroes, not Tales of, and it's clear, like you said, it's clearly a newsstand edition. A book. So yeah, that threw me for a loop for a second.
I don't know how they kind of thought that they were going to get away with this, number one, because, well, they clearly had a plan, right? They probably thought if you were reading the newsstand run, you were going to get this because this was sold not only in direct market, but in newsstands as well. Because I picked it up in the newsstand because at this time I don't think I was even visiting a comic shop at this point or in 1984. And even though they make reference to what is going on in the Baxter run, it's very cryptic in how they reference it. But yet it is clearly mirroring what is going on in both books, because it's putting certain Legionnaires in different locations, some that we see in the Baxter run, some that we see in the Tales run. So all to say, long story short, that we had to talk about it. And that's what we're going to do.
So Peter, this issue, or this annual, did you mention this? It's a bridge also between the Great Darkness saga and what's going on at this time, if we think of it as currently, so we have that as well. So it's sort of I wouldn't say it's not a sequel. It's a continuation of something from the Great Darkness saga, and it's called The Curse. Which, if people remember from the Great Darkness saga, I don't know how much we want to get into that, Peter, but At the end of that, well, no, maybe we don't want to talk about that yet. Maybe I already said too much.
No, it's right there on the first page, the curse.
Yeah.
It's a little curious that the cover image is a little misleading, but
it is. It reminds me of. It actually reminds me of the character. I can't remember the name of the character from the Magic Wars story.
Oh, I was going to say it kind of reminds me of Prophet from Omen from Omen and Prophet.
Okay.
From the Tales run, because he had those kind of eyes.
I'm sorry. That's what I'm thinking of. Yes, exactly that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I get, for some reason, I get that story and the Magic Wars confused in my head. Anyway. So this is written by Paul Levitz. Keith Giffen is co-plotter, but the art is by the venerated? What's the right adjective there? Kurt Swan is the artist with Romeo Tangle. They're listed as guest artists. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Peter, was how do you feel about Kurt Swan as a Legion artist?
Classic, right? Like sort of classic Legion. He evokes a certain era. In terms of this issue, I was quite surprised at even in this advanced age that he is in at this point, not super advanced, but he's older, that he doesn't miss a beat. It's not as dynamic in terms of like the layout. I have to think they probably just let him go, like someone like Kurt Swan, how much are you going to dictate what he should and shouldn't draw, right? But the characters, they look older. They don't look like the teens. They kind of fit like they should look at this point. Some of the tech is dated. A lot of the tech is dated. But he tries to keep some of it consistent with what's going on in the other books. But as a whole, Kurt Swan, Superman, Kurt Swan, Legion of Superheroes. I have a soft spot for his artwork. What about you?
Well, yeah, like you said, it's kind of classic Legion. I remember reading a lot of stuff by Swan in the Legion in the past, but especially coming off of those first two issues of the Baxter run, as we have, and then going into this annual, it was very striking.
Sure.
The differences in style and tone and like you said, it's not as dynamic. Yeah, static was the word that actually came to my mind looking at this art. But there's technically speaking, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just very different from Mr. Giffen's work.
And I feel like the issue itself is kind of like that. It didn't read as smoothly. It wasn't as smooth a read as the first two issues of the Baxter run. The scenes are very delineated. Here's the scene with Lightning Lad. Here's the scene with the Legionnaires that are in one of the cruisers. Here's the scene with the Legionnaires on Sorcerer's World. And I wonder if some of that is because Giffen is just plotting, but it doesn't look like he's doing layouts, which is something we'll get to when we get to the Baxter issue. Think of the way they brought on Giffen for the 52 Weekly series. He was the glue that held all the artists together because he did thumbnail sketches of what he felt the issue should look like. Most of the time, the artists followed those guides, but every now and then they would change it up. This one feels like it doesn't have that. It doesn't have Giffen's touch. Maybe that's what we're both feeling in terms of, it's not quite, it doesn't quite have the same feel, which again makes it a very interesting bridge, an interesting, different book,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the writing as well. There's a point in my notes, Peter, where I was going through the scenes and just kind of whatever, just kind of pulling out things that were interesting to me, or, well, interesting in various ways, but I'll just leave it at that for now. But at one point I wrote down, did the real Paul Levitz write this? Because it seems like a very, almost like he co-plotted and somebody else wrote the dialogue.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the tone and I don't know. Again, the dynamism comes to mind in describing the difference between the Baxter Run issues we've read so far and talked about and this particular issue. So I don't know. I guess my overall, if I had to give like a 1 cent review, it'd be disappointing of this issue in comparison to what we've read before.
I'm going to give another theory of as to why we both are feeling this. I think, and this speaks to, we'll get to the content soon, but it speaks to why I feel like they kind of are cryptic when they don't outright mention the battle between the Legion and the superheroes and the Legion of supervillains. And they don't ever really kind of come right out and say why they're going to all these different locations like Sorcerer's World and all that. I'm wondering if they had to give this plot so far in advance so that Kurt Swan could draw. I mean, it's an annual, so it's extra pages. I'm wondering if in the schedule of creating these books, if he wasn't drawing this book at the same time issue 1 of the Baxter series was being drawn. So Paul and company couldn't quite be as specific, because what if something changed? You don't want to give anything away. Or they just, again, maybe they just really didn't have it figured out yet. And they said, okay, we have to be generic enough, but we can't really let on with what's going on because we're still working on these other books. So that's what I would be curious to know, is when was this actually being drawn and put together?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Did we give the full credit lists?
No. So, yeah, like I said, Paul Levitz, Keith Giffen, writer and co-plotter, Kurt Swan, Romeo Tango, the guest artist, John Costanza, letterer, Carl Gafford, colorist, and, of course, Karen Berger is editor. I thought this, so like I said, this is called The Curse, but the extra words here on the first page, celebrating the 3rd Legion Annual with one of their brightest and darkest moments, with darkest emphasized there.
Clues, and more clues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, the I think the main thrust of this is that Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad are expecting their child. And that's really the whole point of this story, is that we're going to get a baby Legionnaire and some other stuff going on besides that.
Well, usually up to this point, annuals and anniversary issues were wedding issues. Either Bouncing Boy and Duo Damsel, Queen Projectra and Karate Kid, which I think was in annual number 2. The wedding of Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad was in one of the Treasury ones or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here we have an annual that's not about a wedding. It's actually about a baby being born. So it's a whole new stepping point, a whole new place for the Legion to go. And the reason of why, again, we call it a bridge is because in issue 2 of the Baxter Run, there aren't a lot of Legionnaires that are stationed on Earth. So when the polymer screen gets sucked away by the Legion of Supervillains, the only ones on hand to really counter them is Element Lad, the leader, and Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl, because they're on Medicus 1 expecting to have a baby. But Saturn Girl, she tries to rush into the battle and she's having labor pains, and that's when she says, Garth, the baby's coming, and now we're here. That plot picks up here in this annual, as Eric says. So that's one of the main plots in the story, is the birth of the baby. The other one, just to give like a quick synopsis, the other plot is, again, spinning out of issue 2 of the Baxter run. Element Lad has sent various Legionnaires to figure out who gathered the Legion of Superheroes. If they're all being coordinated and they're all coming together, the Legionnaires feel like it has to be because somebody is doing it, because they're too disorganized, they're too much of clashing personalities. Someone must be behind it all, and their number one menace on the list is Mordru. So they want to check to see if he is still where they last left him. So we get that subplot with the Legionnaires of White Witch, Phantom Girl, Colossal Boy, and Cosmic Boy, all Legionnaires that were in issue 2, just on that one page that was featured the Legionnaires on Earth. So that's that plot line. What are some of the other plot lines there?
Well, one I don't know if it's so short. I'm not even sure you could call it a plot line. It's more like a red herring. But at the very beginning, this doctor brings Lightning Lad in supposedly to toast the impending arrival of the child, and it turns out to be not this doctor that they've been dealing with for I don't know how many issues before Dr. Gimmel shows up and takes over again, but it's actually Starfinger wanting to control Lightning Lad yet again, but it doesn't work, of course. I thought that was really interesting that they throw this in for like 4 pages and it's totally undercut in this annual. You think you're going to get, oh no, it's, this Starfinger's back and you're going to have to deal with that. No, it's just that 4 pages and that's it.
And why is it because, is that a character that Kurt Swan maybe drew back when, because they said it's from Adventure Comics 335 and 336. I guess I really should have looked it up. But you're right. It's such an odd little, let's bring this character back. Now, knowing what I know about the Baxter run, is that Paul Levitz, is that his way to sort of say, okay, here's this Starfinger that used to be a menace but really isn't, and I'm going to create a new one, which he does eventually, spoilers. So it just was a weird kind of like, why are you using him? Is that because Kurt Swan was like, yeah, I really like that Starfinger guy with the Michelin Man costume. Like, I want that.
Yeah. Kurt Swan, I just looked it up. Kurt Swan is the cover artist for issue 335, but he's not listed as the interior artist. That's John Fort.
Okay.
But maybe you're right. Maybe that's just a character he liked or liked to draw. Who knows?
Yeah. One of the other subplots in the book, the Legionnaires from issue 2 that were helping, and issue 1, that were helping to restore Daxam, they connected with Wildfire and Dawnstar, and the other ones include Shadowlass and Timberwolf, Ultra Boy, Mon-El, Chameleon Kid. They're traveling. All the Legionnaires are traveling in this book. They're just traveling because that's all they can do, because it's a bridge between 2 issues. You can't really have them go anywhere because that would further the plot in a way that would confuse things when we get to issue 3. So I thought it was interesting that they were always in transit.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of nothing going on in this issue.
Yeah.
Really.
In that little bit of subplot, Shadowlass is kidnapped by some magical force, and we'll find out what that is. There's a 1-page Invisible Kid 2. It's almost like, oh yeah, don't forget, he's here, he's a member or a reservist, and he's talking with Block and Element Lad. It's not about a lot. Another 1-page where we feature one of my favorite Legion things, the Legion Academy at Montauk Point on Earth, where Bouncing Boy is talking to Shadowlass's cousin named Grev. and what is his name? Shadow Kid, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And he's talking about how he wants to go back to his home planet to take over as the planetary guardian, but he too gets kidnapped. So that's two shadowy powered legionnaires or supporting characters that get kidnapped by these group of mystics. And this is the yet another little plot that runs through. These four mystics that are trying to restore the very person that the legionnaires are in search of, thinking that he's behind the Legion of Supervillains. They're trying to restore Mordru. That's why they kidnapped Shadow Lass and Shadow Kid. And that takes us about halfway through the book so far. So why don't we go and hit some points in the first half, and then we can talk about the second half.
All right. Well, okay, so this is the comic nerd in me, Peter, because the first thing I notice is that Lightning Lad is in his costume when we just saw him in basically civilian clothes. And so I always find that interesting whenever you get different artists doing like this situation where it's not the run of the book, the main run of the book. You have an annual or a special of some sort. And but the stories tie in together. I've seen this before in other comics where things aren't quite right because different people are playing around in the sandbox. Mm-hmm. And so you get this Lightning lands in his uniform instead of the civilian clothes that we just saw him in the previous issue. and I thought, well, maybe I missed something. Maybe he did suit up for some reason, but I couldn't find any place where that would make any sense. But it's just a stupid little thing. And I already mentioned the Starfinger issue. I mentioned before about the is this the real Paul Levitt's writing? And that the point that I wrote that was when we get that scene with Element Lad and a couple of the other Legionnaires who are taking looks like Brainiac 5 and Sunboy and Officer Aaron taking care of this meteor shower that's threatening Earth, apparently. And so Element Lad is saying, basically, this could be a cover for an invasion of Earth, this meteor shower, which Brainiac 5 is like, not impossible, but hardly probable. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is this is really just a filler scene to show some of the other Legionnaires. And maybe that gives credence to your supposition, Peter, about they couldn't really do much with this being a bridge, and maybe the timing of getting it started and whatnot. So they're just kind of throwing a bunch of stuff in here that just doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really tie into anything, really. And it's just little things like that just really bug me about this issue.
Yeah, it's that little page there on page 9 of the annual. You have to assume that the polymer screen is not there because it's, number one, it's not drawn. Number two, it was stolen in issue 2, and it doesn't get put back until issue 3, a new one anyway. So I can see where, again, that whole they're being cryptic, right? Like they're not saying, oh, the polymer screen is gone because the Legion of Supervillains took it, so we have to defend Earth from this meteor shower, because otherwise you have to assume the screen would have taken care of it. So that's why I feel like those little sequences are Paul Levitz's way of saying, okay, I know by this point the screen is going to be gone, but I don't want to outright discuss it. And it also is giving us a status quo of Sunboy and Brainiac 5, because in the previous Tales issue, they were off planet with Supergirl. So their arrival does make sense. It does make sense. But they're not making reference to it. They're not making a specific reference to, oh, we just came back from fighting the Dark Circle, blah, 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 blah. No, they're like, oh, we're just back on Earth. We barely showered after we landed. So it's tricky. It's tricky little I have to imagine the coordination of it maybe was awkward, and unfortunately, it made the book a little awkward as well.
Yeah, but now that you mention that, I have not been reading the Tales issues along with the Baxter Run issues that we were talking about, and I simply forgot about those issues and what happened in them. So you tying that stuff together and making those connections, that it lessens the bad taste in my mouth about this issue a little bit. So I appreciate that you did that.
Yeah. There's a couple little. I'll hit a few high points. In the scene where the Legionnaires are on the planet Avalon, and it's the planet where they last left Mordru, buried alive, because if you bury Mordru, that weakens him for some reason. There's an interesting little part where, at the beginning of page 6, Colossal Boy says, "Why did Element Lad send us here?" And Phantom Girl says, "Oh, complain about the icy weather and be done with it, Colossal Boy, instead of playing dumb about why Avalon's important. Very few of our enemies have the raw power to control so many villains." See, they don't say Legion of Supervillains, they just say so many villains. "And Avalon is the last address of number 1 on the list." She's really kind of short with him. And I just want to make reference to that because when we talk about issue 3, that's going to come up again.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I had that same note too.
Yeah. So let's put a pin in that till we get to issue 3. But I wanted to just make sure we made mention of that same kind of thing here. The other thing I wanted to say about all of this, let's go back to Starfinger. So Lightning Lad says, "You don't think you could catch a Legionnaire by hypnotizing them twice the same way, did you? Brainiac 5 conditioned us to resist your hypnosis after the first time we caught you." And I sort of was like, okay, so you conditioned the Legionnaires to withstand Starfinger's hypnosis, or was it like just hypnosis in general? Because clearly there's a major storyline coming in the Baxter Run in year 3 that we named our podcast after, where Universo does sort of the same thing. Like he hypnotizes or brainwashes or whatever you want to say. So when I read that, I was like, okay, I guess maybe it's only Starfinger's hypnosis that they're all conditioned against. Mm-hmm. Because clearly that's not going to work next time. So I just thought that kind of struck me funny. Yeah, I'm sort of going out of the timeline a little bit, but by the time we actually get to the Universal Project, everyone will forget I've even mentioned it. So no problem there. In the scene with Timberwolf and Chameleon and Shady and Ultra Boy and all of them, a little bit more of that nebulous dialogue. Dawnstar says, "The Raiders must have gone this way, I'm sure of it." And then Wildfire says, "Don't push yourself, Donnie. The whole Legion is trying to find this new conspiracy of supervillains." Like, that's like the closest we get to them saying Legion of Superheroes. So that's Legion of Supervillains. Even Dawnstar by saying the Raiders, right? So she's talking about the Raiders that stole the Power Spheres in issue 2. And they're traveling through the vicinity of M17W, which is where that planet was that they stole the Power Sphere. So, like, they're still traveling through there. So I thought that was interesting that, again, like, that's the other very, very light reference to, I don't know, to keep the book separate, to not tease the newsstands readers too much and sort of saying, nah, you're not reading the Baxter, you know. I don't know. It's just an interesting little bit of dialogue.
Yeah, I really am curious now what the reasoning is or was for doing it this way, because clearly something happened that is not in this issue. It's an annual, so it's not like you would, you wouldn't go to the previous annual to get this, right? It's got to be in the main book. So I guess they're being coy with these references to try and get you to read it. I don't know. It just seems like a really, really weird way to cross promote, and they're not really doing that either. So I don't know. It's bizarre and annoying.
The other, so I made a couple other notes that will play out with issue 3 of the Baxter run. So in that same sequence, Shadowlass gets kidnapped, and Mon-El, he turns around and he can see that something is happening in the cruiser, and he tells Wildfire to wait, but Wildfire, being impulsive, takes off with Dawnstar, and Mon-El says, "Impulsive idiot. They wouldn't stop for that, would they?" So he calls him a bad name. There's some inner turmoil, and I don't mean like to the point of like a soap opera, but some people get along better with others Legionnaires than some people are really good friends. They're like these cliques, right? If you have a team that's 20 members deep, I think of when I do shows and I have a cast of 20 people, there are usually little cliques that form, and they hang out together afterwards. Maybe they'll do things, they'll go out to dinner or movies or something like that. So, and you have to imagine that same thing's going to happen. If you want to put a realistic bent on a group of late teens and 20 somethings, they're not all going to get along. And that kind of leads into the whole Phantom Girl thing too. So both Phantom Girl and Mon-El have things in this issue that carry over to the issue number 3 of the Legion run that I want to bring up then too. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that Mon-El calling Wildfire an idiot was really threw me too in this particular annual, because I don't remember them being cliquish, like kind of like this. I mean, to this degree, I guess, to where you Mon-El is really annoyed with Wildfire to the point that he, calls him an idiot. But I have noticed in the Baxter run, the first 3 issues that we've read, they're kind of pushing that boundary a little bit more to do exactly what you just described, to accentuate the cliquishness of the group and to put a little bit more of an edge to these personalities.
Yeah.
And it just comes off as weird in this particular rendering in the annual. But again, like you said, it ties to what's going on elsewhere. A weird bridge. That's what I keep coming back to.
Yeah. And I guess we have to keep in mind too, Mon-El, this version of Mon-El is old. He's actually from Superboy's time, but then has to get put into the Phantom Zone, and he's there for 1,000 years, and it's the Legionnaires that bring him out of the Phantom Zone. So he's mentally much older than he is physically. Maybe that's why, you get, I think that's why Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen in later issues, and especially the 5 years later, they give him a different sort of feel. They give him a much weightier gravitas. He's sort of separate from the group in terms of not only his power, but, his condition too. So I think some of that could be that way. Like he would be somebody that would probably be impatient with Wildfire, because to him, Wildfire is a baby.
Mm-hmm. I've always thought that that's something that they should have played with more earlier on, before the 5 year later. That very aspect of Mon-El, being so old, and having dealt with being in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years.
Yeah,
they just, he was just the powerhouse, the quiet, solid guy that would show up and take care of business, and basically just be Shady's boy toy.
It's sort of what I feel about like Captain America. Everybody's like, "Oh, Captain America is so old," but that's different. Captain America was in suspended animation. For all he knew, he passed out, and 5 seconds later woke up to a new time.
Right.
So I never consider Captain America old. I consider him old-fashioned.
Yes,
but not old. Whereas Mon-El lived those thousand years or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
Unless I'm getting my Mon-El history wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So
yeah, that's my recollection as well.
Yeah. So let's go to chapter 2, and we'll go a little bit in order here. So Shadowlass, Shadow Kid are kidnapped by these mages that are supporting Mordru. And their whole plan is they feel like, they say, we shall use your enemy's power over Shadow to lay a weird of darkness over the universe, within which the magics you need shall flow into you, and you shall be restored to your glory, ready to strike down all who oppose you. So they're making reference to the Great Darkness saga. Darkness stole your power, and darkness shall return it to him. Because I can't remember. I guess Darkseid took Mordru's power away during the Darkness saga. It's been so long since I've read it.
Yeah. The Legionnaires found Mordru cowering, wherever that was. I think it was on Romder, at Romder's castle again. But they were ready to take on Mordru in this big epic battle, and they get there, and he's mewling like a baby because of what Darkseid's done to him, as I recall.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I sort of got that illusion from this, but like I said, it's been a while since I've read it. So that's what their plan is. Their plan is to blanket the universe with darkness. White Witch does this seance to try to figure out where Mordru is, because he's not buried on Avalon. Someone stole him away. And that's when they realize, oh, he's on Sorcerer's World. So all the Legionnaires are getting the idea or getting notified to go to Sorcerer's World. The mages, they blanket the universe in this darkness. Saturn Girl's ready to have her baby. The Legionnaires attack. Madness ensues. Mordru does not get revived. Saturn Girl has her baby, single baby. And then we're left with 2 codas, 2 epilogues. But we'll touch on those separately. Before we get to that, the Legionnaires are given a fond farewell of the Sorcerer's World by the sorcerers, by White Witch's people that she studied with. And like I said, Mordru does not get revived, and the Legionnaires realize, well, it must not be him that's behind the Legion of Supervillains. So before we get to the 2 epilogues, let's talk a little bit about Chapter 2 and what we thought of the wrap-up, or if there's anything that jumped out to you.
Well, there's a couple things here. I thought it was interesting that the Black Cat, I don't remember the name of that particular character, one of the sorcerers trying to revive Mordru. Hesbia, okay. Hesbia refers to a darkness that could be greater than Darkseid. And I just thought that was interesting that they would make that kind of reference, because, considering what the universe, or that part of the universe anyway, that went through during the Great Darkness saga, it almost, it seems like people are downplaying what Darkseid accomplished, what he almost accomplished. And and I thought, it's just blind subservience to Mordru, perhaps. My guy is better than any other guy, sort of thing. But it just considering what Darkseid is, you would think that these quote unquote evil sorcerers would perhaps know better. But then again, it was 1,000 years between Darkseid's reign during that storyline. So maybe I'm just making too much of it because I read it and was impressed by it. But also interesting, they bring Shady, or they capture Shady and her cousin. And I wondered if perhaps they were trying to, elevate Shadowlass to some degree. On the surface, Shadowlass is just this character who can cast shadows, make things dark. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but they're using Shadowlass and her cousin as a catalyst for the spell that they're doing. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. If indeed there's more to Shadowlass than just making shadows. There's something in issue 3 that makes me think that too a little bit, and I'll talk about that later.
Yeah, she's one of the Legionnaires that is, we talked a little bit about this before about how some Legionnaires are just one of many when it comes to the other people on their planet. But yet there are other Legionnaires that are the sole bearer of power for one reason or another, whether they got powers by themselves or from some accident, or with like Shadowlass, she's like she was meant to be the planetary protector mentioned earlier on in this issue. And I know in the Tales book, after this annual, she goes through like a whole thing on her planet, and it definitely beefs up her role and her power. But yeah, I mean, the whole it sort of makes sense. These are the shadowy characters of the Legion, and if they're going to want to touch on that, Paul Levitz's idea is to blanket the universe so that something else can happen underneath all the mystery of the shadow. And it's a way to get her cousin next to her too. Like, that's what I kind of like about this era of the Legion is the substitute heroes and the Legion Academy. They're not just brought in as a one-off, like, oh, we just need to do a filler story, They're right alongside the Legion. They're supporting characters. And I like that. I like that that it's not just Shadowlass that they're pulling in, but they're pulling in Shadow Kid as well. Mm-hmm. And it puts them a little bit more on the same level, and all of that mockery of like the subs or treating the Academy like students or babies or something like that. I like that. I appreciate that part of it.
Yeah, it makes this universe that much more in depth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that too.
The mages are interesting. The female mage, the one with the sort of like skull cap or her she has like just short hair. She only really speaks in questions about 90% of the time. So if you notice as they talk, so we have the one mage is a Sorin, which is a lizard-like, snake-like alien that has showed up throughout the Legion quite a lot. There was a science police that was also a member of this race, and he turned out to be a Dark Circle member. We have this character here, so he has a very unique way of speaking. The male, the one with the bald, his head looks like a monk's head, right? That monk's haircut style. He always starts his word balloons with "Yea." Yea, we have done his bidding valiantly. And yea, let the spell be cast, sprinkle the dust of stars passing on them. Or earlier in the book, he also has another one. Yea, we have brought him back from the pit. So every time he speaks, he has a very distinct way of speaking. So between the two of them, I think that's cool, like especially in terms of magicians, or sorcerers or whatever, acolytes as they call them. First of all, we have a black cat, which is awesome. It's not even a humanoid; it's totally a black cat that this mage took the form of. And then we have the female speaking in questions, the male with his dialogue. And that's a real interesting touch. That's a little bit of writing that I thought that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I actually hadn't noticed that, Peter. So, yeah, I like that. That's a nice bit of work done by Mr. Levitz.
Yeah, so we got to give him kudos where we can for this issue.
Okay, so can I go into something that I'm hoping you can explain it to me, Peter, because this whole sequence where the spell has been cast, darkness descends, and Mordru is supposedly awakening. There's this point on page 25 where Mordru's right eye opens, and there's like a spark, a light, a reflection or something, power emanating from his eye. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Which I just noticed as you were talking before about the sorcerers, the black cat, Hesbia, on page 8, also has something very similar shown in her right eye. So I don't know if there's any connection there or just happenstance. But anyway, this, like I said, the spell's been cast. And then a couple pages later, Mordru is shown almost completely he's shown completely covered from the earth that he was caked in before. And he's got this beam of light coming out of that eye, which I don't get. I don't understand this spell in relation to what's going on with Mordru and that whole fight scene that's going on between the Legionnaires and the sorcerers. So I'm hoping you can shed some light on that.
Oh, I don't think I can help you with that. Because I guess it's just to say, I mean, because he does say there on page 28, the Sorin says, soon his full power shall return. So even though he's unearthed, it's not done.
Right.
And Hesbia says, we shall soon subdue the Legion and conclude our spells. So even though they unearthed him and maybe brought him to a certain point, there still was something else left. And they didn't have a chance to do that before the Legionnaires just buried him once again. So, yeah, he's like, yeah, I guess that sort of makes sense, right? Like, if he was, I mean, look, he went up against Darkseid, right? So, Darkseid, he's cowering in fear, as you said. He's buried alive again. That's a lot. That's probably took a big toll on him. So, just unearthing him probably isn't enough. And then the easier answer is Paul Levitz isn't ready for him yet.
yeah, exactly. And it just occurred to me, maybe I'm misreading this. Maybe that beam of light that I think is coming out of Mordru is actually, because they reference restoring his power, bringing it back into him in a sense. And so maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the power is going into his eye. I don't know. I just the whole eye thing just threw me.
Mm-hmm.
But the eyes are the windows to the soul. That maybe that's what they're trying for. I don't know. It's just a really weird detail that I seem to be fixated on, and it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Well, there you go. If it wasn't for the large man face on the cover, if it wasn't because it didn't have like beard and a mustache, I would sort of say, well, maybe that's Mordru on the front, and it's the Legionnaires falling out of again his eye that's zapping,
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really see like a beard or mustache. But it could be maybe that's Keith Giffen's version of the story's events. I used to always think it was a miscolored Darkseid, but now that you said that, I'm like, oh, it might actually be Mordru in his catatonic state.
Mm-hmm.
So there's your answer again. Like, the only reason they did that is to match the cover, or the cover matched the interior, or whatever.
Yeah.
There's a lot in this book that's like we really can't get too heady with, because it's such a limbo kind of book. There's I think there's some interesting things, especially connecting to issue 3, and I have one other point that I want to bring up about Mordru that is fascinating or interesting in a larger DCU context. And then we obviously we want to talk about the epilogues too. So
yes.
Yeah. Well, let me do that. Let me talk about the Mordru nugget, the little bit of information that when I read it, I was like, oh. So let's see what page that is. It's when the Legionnaires, it's after everything has been wrapped up and they're talking to the sorcerers of Sorcerer's World on page 34. And White Witch says, the sorcerer says, "You've brought Mordru back so our Earth may hold him helpless forever. So now he's buried on Sorcerer's World. And the White Witch says, "Why is it that the ground holds such terror for him? It cannot harm a mage of such power." To which the sorcerer says, "We make our own terrors his from a nightmare happenstance long lost in his past." That's probably at this point just like a placeholder. Like they don't really want to give away information. And I have to assume that they did not know what they were eventually going to do with the character. And I'm also speaking as someone who hasn't read all of Mordru's appearances prior to this, so I don't know if they've ever explained his fear of being buried before. But what this annual is doing is, sort of saying it's a mystery, and it's a mystery that deals with something that happened to him when he was younger. So do you know what that mystery is? Do you know where that comes from?
I don't recall it, but I seem to have a vague recollection that they do address it at some point.
Yeah, Keith Giffen actually addresses it, along with whoever his writing partner is, in the Amethyst miniseries that comes out. So Amethyst had 3 series. She had a 12-issue maxi series. Then she had a 16-issue, I think, regular series. And then she had another 4-issue miniseries drawn by Esteban Maroto, who was the artist for the Atlantis Chronicles that Peter David wrote. He has a very fantasy style, so it's beautiful. It's perfect for Amethyst. And that came out somewhere in like 87, 88. So we're talking another 3-4 years from now. And in that miniseries, Keith Giffen furthers the exploration that the Amethyst concept is mixed up within the whole Lords of Order and Lords of Chaos, which is a Dr. Fate thing, right? So in that miniseries, one of the characters on Gem World gets corrupted by a Lord of Chaos, and he takes a new name, and his new name is Mordru. He's called Mordru the Dark Lord. And if you remember the James Robinson JSA series that Jeff Johns eventually took over, like in the 2000s, the first villain that they fight in issue 1 through 4 is a character named the Dark Lord, who is Mordru. But it's not Mordru that we would know during the Legion of Superheroes time. It's a younger Mordru. So that fear and that being buried alive, they finally show it in that Amethyst miniseries. And that's how he gets tied up into eventually that's where I guess it was understood that he was buried there and then doesn't show up again until the Legion of Superheroes, until James Robinson said, "Oh, I can use him too," and then there's like all these other connections that between Sorcerer's World and Gem World, and it just keeps going deeper and deeper, and suddenly Keith Giffen has found a way to pull this huge tapestry together, and he's a maniac for it, but I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, they must have addressed the buried alive thing with Mordru in that JSA series, because I never read any of the Amethyst books. Mm-hmm. But I clearly recall knowing that about Mordru, that something in his past had affected him this way.
Yeah,
tying it into the Legion lore,
and the whole Gem World stuff. I mean, the Gem it'll come back way at the end of the Baxter series. It comes out in the 5 years later stuff. Like they run that little bit of information for a long time.
That's one of the things I love about the Legion, that they do that. They tie all this stuff together. It makes the DC universe that much richer.
Yeah.
and I don't think we have that as much. I mean, maybe we're getting a little bit of that back now, with Rebirth being at the point that it is, but it was missing for quite a while.
Yeah.
And now we're maybe, like I said, maybe we're getting it back a little bit, but looking back on this stuff, like you just talked about, man, that just really makes me excited about the DC universe and how it could develop into what it did, and how things could change and develop and grow. You know, it's like any other organism, you know, things happen, you adapt and you grow, and it's a wonderful playground that they had.
And that's that whole thing about, you know, taking new information and reworking it into a concept, or looking backwards and going, okay, what can we make of that particular character or whatever based on what we know now, is exactly what is going on in this epilogue.
Right.
So let's talk about the epilogue. What were your thoughts, or give a rundown of what happens here? So
epilogue the first, we see the baby, Imra's and Garth's baby, and what's interesting about that is that Imra reveals that, because they're talking about, you know, because twins on Winath are common, but twins are apparently not common on Titan from Sun Girl's planet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but Imra reveals that she could have sworn that she felt two separate babies' thought patterns, but there's only one. And so this happened when the darkness came through, that spell, when she had the baby, and we find out in the next epilogue what happened there.
Yeah, and when she says that, where she says, I thought I felt two babies, that baby that she has in her arms is smiling, and I've always thought that was a creepy image.
Oh my God. So yes. And so I looked at that picture, and I tried to somehow see if there's some sort of connection to what we see next, or in some other depiction of this other character. So yeah, I always thought that was too, especially because in the previous panel there, right above that one, the baby is, bright-eyed and with its mouth open. It looks like a little baby. And then this weird smile thing is just, like you said, it's creepy.
Yeah.
But then you turn the page for the second epilogue, and you know why it's creepy. and
Keith Giffin's back.
Yes, I was just going to say that. And we get Keith Giffen for 2 pages in this annual, and I thought, that's nice.
Yeah, and they're damn good. So here it is. This is exactly why the book is called The Curse. This is it. So let's go ahead and talk about these 2 pages.
Well, so it actually, the annual actually ends with a quote from the Great Darkness Saga, with Darkseid. I leave you my curse, Legionnaires, the curse of darkness growing within you, destroying you from within, and that which is purest of you shall be the first to go. And so we find out that Darkseid either engineered this or took advantage of the situation, this spell that these sorcerers were casting, in order to kidnap the twin.
Mm-hmm.
And then transform the twin. And we don't, I mean, it's kind of obvious if you know Legion lore and you know these characters, what's going on here, but it's not explicitly stated what it is that Darkseid does to the twin. And I think actually that is resolved in a future annual.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but not for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But the name alone that he gives him speaks, again, if you know Legion lore, speaks volumes.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
That's right. I forgot.
Yep. He gives the name.
Oh, okay. So he does. Yeah. So yeah, you know that this baby gets turned into Validus. I remember reading this for the first time and going, "Oh my God, this this creature that I've seen, battling with the Fatal Five against the Legionnaires, and it totally makes sense. The lightning, the brain, the big brain. It was again one of those really lovely touches, one of those lovely connections that they made to the Legion past.
Mm-hmm.
That I just thought I just love it. I love that kind of stuff, Peter.
Yeah, because that was the thing. I mean, the Validus creature is almost like a sentinel, or almost like trying to think of another big bad, sort of like the Anti-Monitor, but not quite that level. Or Galactus. Like when they show up, everybody always goes, "Oh, poop." We're about either someone's going to die or we're going to all get beat up really well. So, I like that Levitz and company are basically pulling a Roy Thomas here and doing major retconning and saying, because Darkseid even says, "I confine you to the past back through the years so that you shall meet your parents full grown before you have even been born." And like you said, those early Validus appearances, he was this hulking brute. He was said to be stronger than Superboy, and he had these mental lightning bolts. I mean, they specifically call that like mental lightning. And Paul Levitz must have been like, well, mental lightning, if Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad are a couple, that's where you're going to get mental lightning. So I think that's just really interesting that he managed to do this. Now, as a kid reading this in 1984, that really didn't have much weight for me because I hadn't read enough Legionnaire stories to know how brutal Validus really was. And it was only until later, whether he showed up in the Baxter run or I read about him in Who's Who or whatever, that I was like, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah. See, one of my early Legion reads was a reprint of the first appearance of the Fatal Five, and then some other tales that I read as well featuring Validus. So it had a lot of weight for me at that time.
Oh, that's great. And it's really cool. So I liked what you said about, did Darkseid take advantage or did he already know? I'd be curious to go back to those Legion stories around the Great Darkness saga. Did Saturn Girl know when did Saturn Girl discover she was pregnant? And then work either backwards or forwards from there. Like, if he gave that curse at the end of Great Darkness Saga and we already knew that she was pregnant, yeah, they probably all thought, oh, he's going to attack one of the Legionnaires. And then, or if it happened after, then yeah, he really did, or, take advantage of that. And for them to wrap that up, to get back to the curse like that and to wrap it up into all, the last 2 pages more than make up for what came before it. So it's one of those, like, if you don't have this in your collection, but you've seen it and you're like, should I pick it up? Just pick it up for the last 2 pages.
Yeah.
Really? So
I have a couple questions about this for you.
Okay.
Well, I guess one's an observation and one's a question for you. So after the Great Darkness Saga, basically Darkseid just left. They really couldn't defeat him, but he'd had enough. They annoyed him enough that he'd left. And so this is the first time we've seen Darkseid since then, I believe. And it makes me wonder, well, what the hell has Darkseid been doing besides planning this revenge, I guess?
And
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I think I know what you're going to say, and your point's more pertinent here.
No, I was actually going to say, and we're not going to find out for a decade or whatever it is.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So they do come back to that, but it's obvious it's not like he's incapacitated, and yet it would lessen probably the impact and the quality of the Great Darkness Saga story to keep bringing Darkseid back because he's such a good villain. But, he's just there. I don't know. It's just weird to think of the dark side just out there skulking around in the universe, not really doing anything until we come back to him in that coda that we get, like you said, much later.
Right. And then kind of gives credence to why I like Darkseid in the background. I've always liked him. The way Kirby used him, like popping up in your living room to be a smartass, for a little bit. I guess we probably should have known that it was going to be him by the end of the book. I know when I read it, I certainly had no idea, because at that point I hadn't read the Great Darkness Saga yet.
Oh,
remember, my Legion stories start with issue 304. That's well after. And I didn't pick up those issues until probably not for a while yet. I could get the context, but I didn't know the detail.
So that brings me to the question I had. So at the beginning of this, when we got to this, the second epilogue, I read that quote from Darkseid that appeared in the Great Darkness Saga. I leave you my curse. And so I remember when I first read that, and thinking, oh my gosh, what is Darkseid going to do? And then we get this. And while what he does fits the curse, when I got to this in the annual, especially the first time I read it, it was like, really? This is it? I mean, it's insidious. It really is. But I guess I expected something a little more... grandiose is the word I want to use, but that doesn't really describe it best. I don't know. I expected, I guess, something a little more direct than this. And so I've often, whenever I think about this story and what Darkseid did, I wonder, well, was this really what Levitz had in mind? Did he intend to do this initially, or do you have something else in mind, or he just put that in there? Probably this is the case. He probably just put that in there to make you think and go, ooh, Darkseid's going to be back someday. Not really knowing exactly what he's going to do. But I don't know. The curse seems more, I'll use that term again, grandiose than perhaps what we get here. But like I said, when you think about it, what he did is just devastating. Potentially devastating to Imra and Garth. Right. Only they don't know it until much later.
Yeah.
And as I recall, it's resolved a little too easily. So he doesn't, in my mind, Darkseid doesn't get his revenge really, other than, some lost time that the parents have with the child, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, and Validus, he killed Invisible Kid.
Well, that's true.
He is responsible for at least one death. Yeah. I can't remember if any more show up after that. Yeah. That's pretty tragic.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
Yeah. It's an interesting notion for a character. What's interesting to me is there are a lot of readers at this point used to compare Marv Wolfman and Chris Claremont as writers. But I really think the comparison is Chris Claremont and Paul Levitz, because they're writing these large universes. They drop seeds that sometimes flourish and sometimes they just stay in the ground. And we don't ever get back to it again for years, or somebody else picks it up. And I feel like that's what Levitz is playing with here. Like, land this book with a major ending, cliffhanger, even if you want to think of it, and never resolve it. Like, but it does, in a way, it almost doesn't have to be resolved, because we know what the story is. We know that he becomes Validus. It's like you go back and read those stories again, and it's almost like Paul Levitz is saying, go ahead, go read them now and tell me what you think, and I'll be back here. When you're all caught up again, then we'll drop another, Darkseid or Validus story on you.
Yeah.
But so, when I use the word retcon, This is the way I love retcons when they happen this way, because it just totally it doesn't negate what came before. It just adds this new layer that you go back and you're like, oh, well, that's that now. Oh, that's incredible.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, that was the annual.
We talked about that more than I anticipated.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said. A lot to be said. I don't know if the same can be true about this issue, but we'll see.
Okay. All right.
All right. Why don't you give the credits for the Legion of Superheroes, issue number 3, Baxter Run. We're back.
All right. Legion number 3, Everywhere a Villain, by Paul Levitz, writer, Keith Giffen, designer, and they're both plotters. Keith Giffen, designer. We'll come back to that. Steve Lytle and Larry Malstead, artists. And again, John Costanza, letterer. Carl Gafford is the colorist. Karen Berger is the editor. So, Steve Lytle is here, beginning his short but impressive run.
Steve Lytle. I love this guy.
Yeah?
Yeah,
well, that was going to be my first question. What do you think about Steve Lytle in comparison to Giffen, in comparison to Kurt Swan?
Well, I mean, Steve Lytle on covers, fantastic. We're going to get a whole bunch of new covers for him coming up. I've always liked his style. It's an interesting design to it. It has an interesting feel. The characters are, so hard to explain. It's like the word Cupid doll comes to my mind, but that's not what I mean. Like their ankles, the ankles are little, the waists are little, the eyes are big. It's I don't know. It's like American manga almost. But I dig,
especially the female characters.
Right. And I feel like, they say Keith Giffen is the designer on this book, so clearly he's still doing layouts, or at least doing his thumbnail thing, because that's the way he works. And Steve Lytle is sort of playing with that. I have to imagine that's why they list Keith Giffen as a designer, is because he's giving a roadmap. Because the panel layouts are not terribly different from what would be in a Keith Giffen drawn book. The use of the splash.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, if you look, I feel like if you look at the previous issues, and I mentioned how the first issue was designed one way, but then the second issue felt like it was fuller and bigger, and this one as well kind of has that same. Put it this way, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I can't imagine that Steve Lytle is this great of a storyteller so early in his career. Because there are some really interesting storytelling things that are happening that we'll talk about in a couple of the scenes that, to me, feel like it has to come from Keith Giffen, because that's the magic of like the Levitz-Giffen collaboration. Like, Levitz could do the story stuff, but Giffen is really a good storyteller. Even if you don't like his artwork, his storytelling is so good, the sequentials. And when I look at this, I'm like, there's no way this is Steve Lytle's. It just can't be his layouts. Even as kooky as an artist as Todd McFarlane is at times, it took him a while until he got to Spawn, right? Like Spider-Man, Infinity Inc., Batman Year 2. There's some really wonky page layouts. There's some crazy things that he does. But then when you get to Spawn, again, whether you hate it or like it, the craft of it is pretty good. And it's clearly Todd McFarlane's way of doing comics. So when I read this, it didn't feel abrupt. The art style is different, but the way I read it felt the same, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would disagree just a little bit, because I think and I have some revelations for you about this whole process.
Okay.
From the Legion Companion Tomorrow's book.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt, for the most part, I agree with you. But there were times in this book where things got really blocky on the page.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of the panels, there's a lot more smaller panels on the page in some cases, and maybe that has a lot to do with what I'm about to reveal here in terms of the construction of this issue. But to me, it was clearly, it looked like he was going off of some direction from Giffen, but was really, throwing in his own stuff. And so let me go ahead.
Does the book? Well, let's start this. Let's start. Does the book tell you why Keith Giffen left the book?
I don't. I think, as I recall, because I read this a week ago, and I remember now. But I think he just needed a break.
Well, yeah, he did that Legion poster. Do you remember that Legion poster from around this time?
Yeah,
that had they said to him, "Hey, the Legion of Superheroes is popular. Why don't you do a poster?" So in his mind, he said, "Sure, I'll put every single character that has appeared in the Legion book on this poster," and he got burnt out. He in one of the back issue magazines, also from Tomorrow's Magazine, he says they ask him, "Why did you leave?" and he said, "It was that poster." By the end of it, he's like, I could not draw Legion anymore because of it, which is like, that's insane. It's almost like Marv Wolfman. He said after the Crisis, I saw him at a panel in Baltimore years ago, and he said, after I wrote the Crisis, I actually had like a mental thing where I could not write comics anymore because I had exhausted my brain writing the Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, that's killer. Oh my God. I mean, because, Giffen is leaving midway through the book. And it was all because he was like, nope, I'm done. So what do you have to, what information? I'm anxious to hear this.
Well, okay. So a little bit of background on Steve Lytle, in case people are interested. So I actually first encountered Lytle's work in New Talent Showcase. He had drawn, I think the strip was Echo. It was this sound-based superhero character. And I remember really liking that. I think it was Echo. I'm questioning my own memory here. But because I still have that those issues in which that character appeared in. And so it was only some months. I wrote this down somewhere. Hold on, Peter. It was only, I believe it's only some months between when he did that New Talent Showcase and came onto the Legion. And actually, he was wanting to be. He was a huge Legion fan, and he really wanted to be doing the Tales book. And so he had tried out for that, and there was some talk about him doing it, but then that didn't work out for some reason. And then he always found it ironic that he ended up on the main book. Okay, so anyway, so there's that. But then when it comes to, talking about, Giffen being the designer here and doing the thumbnails you mentioned, which is true in part. And so in this interview in like I said, the Legion Companion book, the question was, when you took over, Keith Giffen was given credit for layouts. How closely did you have to follow what he had done? And Steve Lytle says, I'll set the record straight, I guess. In those days, what happened was several issues had been solicited in advance, and they'd been solicited with Keith Giffen's name as the artist. The problem was that according to DC's own policies, if the artist changed in a book that had been solicited for retailers, then that made the book returnable.
Mm-hmm.
So if they solicited books and said Giffen was doing the book, and then suddenly some new guy that nobody had heard of started doing the book, then theoretically retailers could have sent the book back and got a refund. DC would have lost money, blah, blah, blah. So what they wanted was, since they were definitely not going to have Keith Giffen drawing it by his own choice, but they'd already committed to several issues drawn by him, they had to come up with some way to keep Giffen's name on it. And what they did was they had him do thumbnail sketches. Some were a little more elaborate than others, but they were all very tiny, suggesting where panels should be and what the basic layout of the panel was. These were all really small, a little bigger than index cards. They handed those to me and said, okay, take these and don't slavishly follow them. If you feel like he's doing something really good, go with it. If not, go your own way. I mean, could you imagine being told, hey, don't follow Giffen. Do what you want. For someone new coming into a book, especially the Legion at that time, one of the hottest books in DC's roster, and being told, hey, do what you want. That's just crazy to me.
But it does sound like they I would think a young artist like that probably is going to go, maybe 70 Keith Giffen work, 30% his work. I can't imagine it went the other way.
Well, so he talks about that too. So the first issue, the issue number 3, his first issue, with the exception of 7 pages. So he said, I think on the first issue, they picked 7 pages out and said, don't do them like Giffen did, do something different. Blah, blah, blah. Exception of those 7 pages was pretty much Giffen's thumbnail sketches guiding me through. With the next issue, so issue 4, something like a third of the issue or half of the issue was in thumbnails, and then the rest of the thumbnails never came in the mail. So I was kind of on my own.
So that's where it's going to be interesting. So when we jump to issues 4 and 5, we'll start to really feel more of his style coming through. I'd be curious to see what 7 pages those were.
Yeah, because I don't think that, I don't know. Did I say, was it the first 7 or just 7 pages?
You just said 7 pages?
Yeah, they just said 7 pages. They didn't say the first 7 because I was just kind of flipping through the book now, just trying to get a sense of those 7 pages. Because so like I said before about the blockiness, the multiple panels on a page. Mm-hmm. There's one page in here in particular that I'm referring to. Yeah, page 9. This is where Dream Girl is being attacked by the Hunter guy.
Hunter.
His name. Hunter, okay. And then she's taken out by Silver Slasher. But, there are these small little panels on the page, and they're not separated by white space in many cases, which is very different from what we've been accustomed to in these first few issues with Giffen. But at the same time, on the previous page, you get that scene between Lightning Lord and Ayla. And it looks very much to me like a Giffen layout.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, it would be really cool to find out what those 7 pages were specifically. And then you have all the splash pages too, which remind me a lot of Giffen.
Yeah. What if it was the splash pages that are the 7 pages?
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of them. There's I don't know how many. I counted them at one point, but I don't know that I remember. There's a ton of splash pages in this issue.
Well, that's what threw me off when I read this issue, because I remember those scenes. I remember those splash pages very vividly. But I thought it happened later in this story, like maybe issue 4. So when I read it in this issue, I was like, oh, here they are. Oh, okay. Especially because it's the confrontation. It's the big confrontation between heroes and villains. It's everything that you think we want in this storyline, but it's happening in issue 3, which then made me go, oh, well, clearly Levitz is giving us what we want, but then saying, oh, but we still got 2 more issues. Not that we knew that. I don't know if we knew it was a 5-part storyline, but it's interesting that he's giving the readers the big battle, and yet there's still more to come. So, the plan is bigger than what we really think. It's bigger than what the Legionnaires think. They don't even know. So for all they know, I think they even mention it. For all we know, that the villains just want to kill us. but that's not really what it is. So that's those splash pages in this issue were it was an interesting little throwback to a memory of when I first read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just counted as you were talking. There's essentially 6. I mean, technically, a couple of them aren't splash pages, but they're essentially splash pages.
Yeah,
that's a lot in in one issue of a book. I always felt like that those splash pages, while they are showing us the battle between the heroes and the villains, they're not really. They don't come across to me as very epic because there's so much on the page. And it's more constricting. It just I don't know. It loses a sense of drama to me with the way that this is presented. I don't know if that is necessarily the artist or I don't know. I'm having a tough time articulating what it is that I'm trying to get across here. I just get it. Go ahead.
I know where I know where you're going with that. And that's a point that I have about the overall issue itself. So, let's backtrack. Let's start with, what was your general thought for this issue? As a chapter, as a book, after you got done reading, what were some of your general overall reactions?
I was really kind of disappointed because we've had so many, up to now, the first 2 issues, we've had so many kind of great character moments, and this sense of the drama building, this sense of a mystery a bit. And what we get here is, like I said, where there's like these 6 splash pages, and a lot of that is battle scenes, and not very interesting battle scenes. To me. And so it was like half of this book is build up to the battle scenes. We get the battle scenes, and then we get this really quick ending to this particular issue. And it was just overall just kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I sort of wrote the same thing. I was like, it felt like it was a bit of a dip in terms of the weight.
Yes.
Per scene. It definitely moved the larger story along. I'm not going to say that it didn't further the plot, because it did, and it had some revelations. But I feel like they weren't as strong as I wanted them to be, and the sense of danger. It's like he's still taking us along, and because we know what's going to happen. It's kind of like he has to, I don't know, are they purposely keeping it light because they know something tragic's going to happen at the end? And it's interesting when you read the letter columns for the Baxter run, and then also for the equivalent issue in the newsstand, people are saying it too. They feel like it feels a little too easy what's happening.
Yeah.
And so I felt that way too with this issue, although there's some really good stuff in it that I liked. I have to agree. This was I don't know. And it almost felt like this should be chapter 4, not 3, like, or I don't know, or 2.5. It just wasn't, it didn't hit me like the first 2. Now, is that because Giffen isn't on the book? Did that maybe have something to do with it? I don't know, because I mean, visually maybe, but I mean, the story, it still feels like Paul Levitz, but maybe we're missing the Giffen component. But yet I still like the artwork, even in this transitional phase. So it's tough. It's a book that, it's not a poorly executed book. I just, like you said, after I read it, I was kind of like, okay. And now I'm in completely uncharted territory, because I really don't remember these next 2 issues. I know the big thing that happens, but I don't remember what the sequence of events are. So
neither do I.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see our reactions after this one.
Although I remember the word that I wanted to use. I used the word constricting. Claustrophobic is kind of the word I was going for there, or I wanted to use.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought maybe that was the intent. So like the splash pages with the battle scenes is like, 8 or 10 characters on a page, something like that, right? Showing what's going on there. But it's so compressed and so. But I thought maybe that was the tone they were going for some reason. I'm not sure that the narrative supports that supposition, though.
Well, you know what does support that? This book you truly can judge by its cover. Because that cover has a lot going on.
Yeah. And is indicative of many of the pages that I keep referencing.
Yeah. Like when I like that cover because it's almost like the next moment after the first two covers. We got the Legion of Superheroes. Yeah, you got the Legion of Superheroes on the first one, and like you mentioned, you got the villains on the second one, almost as if they're waiting for the heroes. And then all of a sudden you got this one, which is just a mishmash of people. There's some interesting story things going on in the cover and in those splash pages that I'll talk about. But when I looked at this cover, after I read it and I looked at this cover, I was like, yeah, that's about right. That's what I felt.
It was an issue I read.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really a disservice to. I mean, because there's some interesting things in here, but
yeah, I'm not as. It's by no means bad. Or
no,
I'll speak. Yeah, I'll speak for myself. I don't think it's bad. It's just it's different. So, let me see. For those of you who maybe aren't reading along, I'll just give a super quick synopsis. So we talked about the annual, and the story opens with a group of Legionnaires leaving Sorcerer's World. So again, if you haven't read that annual, you're not quite sure what's going on, although they say see Legion Annual on the second page. And again, we get these scenes of Legionnaires in transit, just like I was actually trying to track to see how well they kept track of, are the Legionnaires together as they should be, right? Like these Legionnaires just leaving Sorcerer's World. Okay, that's right. Those are the characters that should be there. The ones that are on Earth, are those the ones that should be on Earth? Because some of them left, and they do a somewhat good job of keeping track of where all these characters are. So anyway, as the Legionnaires travel and get the general alert that the villains are on Orlando, what happens is they start to get sucked onto the planet by Zamir's teleportation powers. So it's basically they're being blindsided as they travel. We get a scene between Element Lad and Siobhan Aaron, who they finally kiss, so their romance is kindling. We get a scene in the dungeon of Orlando with Karate Kid and Princess Projectra, who are being held captive because they were captured last issue. Another confrontation between Lightning Lord and his sister. We'll talk about that. The scene where that you mentioned, that Dream Girl gets attacked by some of the Legion of Supervillains. So this is one of those things where I said about these characters in transit. This particular group, Starboy, Dream Girl, and Shrinking Violet, they've been in transit since issue 1. So issue 1, issue 2, and the annual, they've been leaving Ventura. It's like, how long does it take to leave Ventura? And then they finally show up here.
Well, and it's funny you mentioned that too, because it just occurred to me what we find out regarding the villains and their transit. So there is a whole lot of traveling going on here.
Yeah.
For various purposes.
We get a one-page interlude with R.J. Brand talking to Colossal Boy's parents, particularly his mother, because she's giving up being president, which is sort of interesting. Then we get a whole bunch of fight scenes between the villains and the heroes. We get the sort of anticlimactic revelation that Nemesis Kid is behind this all after the cliffhanger of issue 2.
Exactly.
And then it's out of nowhere. I mean, they even mention his name early on in the book. We haven't, on page 3, Tara says they come as Nemesis Kid said they would. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. You just gave a cliffhanger in issue 2. We were supposed to guess who this is, and you're just outing him.
Yeah.
So they give the name, and then they show him here, and I'm like, okay, I guess it wasn't a major revelation. So they're on Orando. The power sphere and the polymer screen are surrounding Orando. We get a little bit of insight of what this plan actually is going to be. More battles. The villains get sucked away. We get an interlude on Medicus 1 after the birth of Imra's baby. And not only do the villains get sucked away, but then the whole damn planet gets sucked away, leaving behind confused legionnaires, even though some of them were also sucked away. And then the Legion of Supervillains are in this kind of limbo between our universe and the universe where they're going to wind up and eventually, hopefully, take over.
Yeah, I'm so like you mentioned earlier. I have no idea besides the big thing that happens in issue 5 or 4, whichever one it is. The big thing that happens because of the storyline. I have no idea what's going on here. Where they're trying to go. Why do they even think that they can go to this other place and just take it over? Did someone go there? What is this? Is this even going to be something that is discussed?
Yeah, I'm at a loss myself.
And when you mentioned the reveal of Nemesis Kid, well, not so much of a reveal, but it's just kind of shown. Given the build up from the previous issue, there's some other things in here too, like the very end of the book. The climax of this is the planet being taken, Orando disappearing from this universe, and yet we get this weird ending between Nemesis Kid and Ron Carr that just seems like really anticlimactic to what just happened, to the plot device that was thrown our way. Just this whole issue to me, Peter, is just kind of off in many ways. I mean, not as much as the annual, but
So what do you want to talk about first?
Well, okay. So you had mentioned before about Phantom Girl's comments towards Colossal Boy. And here we get a little more of that biting tongue from Tinya, because she makes some comments about Timberwolf. No wonder you and Block get along so well. But yeah, it's just the characters being shown that they're annoyed with one another is new to me. With this particular run of the Legion, and it's very odd, and I wonder where are we going with this. Besides the fact that Phantom Girl seems to be irritated with multiple people on her team, what does this mean? And I wanted to ask you. Go ahead.
No. Finish your thought.
No, I was going to transition to something else. So go ahead.
Oh. There's in one of the very first Legion books I ever read, there is a sequence. So we're talking the newsstand version now. There is a sequence where I'm pretty sure it's the same thing, where it's Shadowlass and Phantom Girl talking, and they're watching Timberwolf run through this danger room program sort of, and they kind of tease him about Lightning Lass. And kind of laugh at him a little bit. So it's not only it did show up earlier than the Baxter issue. This sort of playful nature, but this is a little more not nasty, but it's just a little bit more biting. Some of it could maybe just It could just maybe have to do with like the situation, but again, I sort of feel like it's the click thing, and it's Paul Levitz trying to put a hierarchy on some of the characters, and maybe on the male characters, because they can come across so similar. All these male characters, they're all heroic, they just have different powers, but they all look alike. But I feel like Phantom Girl is almost comparing them to Ultra Boy, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in terms of, I have this, and I said this before in a previous episode, I have always had a preconceived notion that he was kind of like the himbo of the group. But that's not true. That's not true. And it's sort of like Phantom Girl being very overprotective, and to point out to the readers who the real sort of not so intelligent male Legionnaires are. Or it could just be she just doesn't like the guys. She only likes her guy and Mon-El,
Yeah.
Again, because of this clique. So
yes.
And she's one of my favorite characters, so she can do no wrong in my book. But it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting idea to give them a little bit of tension.
No, I agree that it's a good storytelling choice to introduce that tension. It's just they didn't do it that much, and then suddenly with this Baxter run, it seems like they're really ramping that up.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, maybe part of that is probably the situation, but we're not seeing that so much from other characters so much. So, but we've seen two specific examples of Phantom Girl being kind of mean to her male teammates. So I just think that's it. I want to know what is this something with Phantom Girl? Just happenstance that Levitz is putting these words into Tinya's mouth for some reason.
Yeah. Well, there's two more things along those same lines. So remember when I brought up Mon-El calling Wildfire an idiot?
Mm-hmm.
On page 18, he talks to Wildfire during the battle, and he says, how do we pin them down? There's so many of them. And Wildfire says, beats me, but I guarantee we'll have one hell of a time trying to hold on to these creeps. And I thought it was interesting that Mon-El came to Wildfire to Mon-El is Mon-El. He's a Superman character, right? But yet he's coming to Wildfire and saying, how are we going to do this? And if you look at the battle and look at the splash pages, even the cover, Wildfire is doing damn good in this battle. He's on it. He's not getting beaten or anything. And it made me think, like, even though Mon-El might think of him as an idiot, when it comes to fighting and it comes to who are the powerful members of the Legion of Superheroes, they may not get along personally, but he knows that that's the teammate you go to. Like, he's a solid combatant. And I like that little pickup. And I don't know if Paul Levitz really was trying to connect A to B from the annual to this, but when I read it so close together, I made that connection, and I thought, oh, that's cool. That's cool that he's going to the guy that is doing okay in the battle.
Well, and that's another thing about this team that I really like, is that one of the guys is going to annoy you, with this thing that he's prone to do, like being impulsive, like Wildfire is. But yeah, you respect his abilities in certain other areas. And I really like that they're kind of accentuating that, or at least you are.
Yeah. Well, and then what does the book do then on page 21? It shows it totally flips on Wildfire, because he's like, hey, Dream Girl, don't easy on the boss act. He totally gets cocky again. Element Lad's our leader, and she flips on him. Do you see him around? That leaves me in charge as deputy leader. Now move, help Mon-El put something together for us to stand on. And he says, lightly, lady, you're pushing too hard. So again, there's that confrontation, totally warranted, because they have no idea what's going on. They've just been defeated, more or less. But there's the other side of Wildfire that's like, oh, Wildfire, you kind of take it right to the edge. And I love that she snaps back at him. She's right.
Mm-hmm.
She's totally right in that sequence. Yeah.
Yeah, I pointed that sequence out in my notes too. It's just like, what the heck, Wildfire? Why are you going off on her like this? It didn't seem quite warranted given the situation. But like you said, they just gotten their asses handed to them by the villains, and things aren't going their way. So everybody's on edge.
Yeah, he was doing so good.
Do you want to discuss the scene between the siblings?
Yeah, let's do that. That's probably my favorite scene in the book.
Yeah, mine too. I mean, because we've had that through line, from issue 1 with Lightning Lord and his desire to recruit his sister to his cause, and so finally, and he's also been alluding to or almost threatening that if she doesn't conform, then he won't be able to stop the others from killing her. And so I think that comes to a head here with this scene between them. He basically says, you got to join me, essentially. And that scene on page 7, I don't know if this was, Giffen's thumbnails or this is Lytle doing his own thing here, but the way that Ayla keeps saying no to Mecht, every point that he brings up, no, and every time she says that, the panel gets bigger and closes, does a close up of her face to her eye in the end there. I love that dramatic turn on this page.
That whole sequence those 3 pages, 6, 7, and 8 are really good. And to piggyback on what you said on page 7, what's so great about that close up of her is she's not changing her emotionality. It's really interesting the way he attacks her, because he keeps changing his approach in each panel. It's almost like the 5 stages of grief, right? But it's not grief. It's like he's real confident, then he's sort of dumbfounded and amazed, almost like it's her own fault that all this is happening to her. Then he pleads a little bit, he bargains a little bit and then he demands, and then finally he gets to anger on page 8 and just erupts. But she's totally on the same level. And her no gets slightly smaller, but I just think it's such a great character moment for her. Mm-hmm. And an interesting, almost bipolar view of Mecht. And then, like I said, he gets pissed and assaults her. I mean, so that whole thing about Dream Girl saying a Legionnaire is going to die, this could be it. This could be the Legion. Like, we don't know. If you're just reading this for the first time, you're like, oh my God, he killed her, for all we know. So that's one of the things I did like about this book is they keep moving that goalpost a little bit of like who's going to die. Now, you get to the damn letter column and you see the cover image for issue 4 and you're like, oh, well, I guess that means that's the character that's going to die. But up to that point, it was a nice little way to keep that mystery going, I thought.
Yeah, sleight of hand, a bit of sleight of hand. Yeah.
And knowing what we know is going to be the outcome of all this sibling rivalry, the color scheme of Mecht lightning and the color scheme of the smoke coming off of Ayla is interesting.
What do you mean?
Do you know what happens to her after this issue?
I don't know.
Okay, then let's just leave it at that.
Okay,
and we'll come back to it in a future issue. Let me see if there was something else I had to say about. This was the page 6 when we see Karate Kid and Queen Projectra. That was the first sort of real bit of danger I felt in this issue. Like I was like, ooh, boy, you don't even see their face. Like they're imprisoned.
Yeah.
These are my favorite 3 pages in the book. All right, where do you want to go next?
Well, okay. So I mentioned in the annual, I said something about Shadow Lass, whether they're trying to elevate her in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing I was alluding to then has to do with page 11, one of the battle scenes here where Shadow Lass, she's casting, I don't know, shooting a shadow. I don't whatever the proper terminology is, but Lazon flies through it and shreds it, like kind of like looks like fibrous material.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was an interesting visual. I mean, it's Lazon, so he's a light powered character. So, maybe that makes sense. But then on the next page, she fires at, I think it's Tyr. Yeah, Tyr. And again, her shadows seem to have this tangible quality to them, because the way it's shown here, it's almost like it looks like paint was just kind of thrown on a wall. That's the visual that comes to my mind. And Tyr cries out, that just could be just being frustration that he can't see. But I don't know, just the way that they're showing Shadow Lass between these 2 issues, it made me think that they're subtly altering the way that she casts shadows, or what her shadows really are, or something. And maybe, like I said, I'm making too much out of it, but I thought it was an interesting visual and an interesting potential with that character.
Mm-hmm. And that's also reflected on the cover too. The battle.
Oh, that's right.
Shadow Lass and Lazon. Yeah.
Yeah. Although it looks more like, instead of like I described the fibrous, it looks more like kind of like glass or some sort of breakable material.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting choices that they're making visually for her powers. That's all.
Well, let's talk about these splash pages a little bit. Because there is some interesting storytelling stuff that's happening from one to the other.
Uh-huh.
You can go bit by bit. Like old Veer is using his heat vision on Mon-El and then punches him in the second one.
Mm-hmm.
But then later on, Mon-El gets the upper hand and punches him back on page 16. So there's their little battle. You mentioned Lazon and Shadow Lass. He's got the upper hand on the first one. He's sort of got zooming around on the second one. And then you get a little bit deeper into it, and Dawnstar uses, it's almost like a rematch, uses his speed and sends him, she makes a quick turn and sends him hurtling into Titania, even though Ultra Boy calls Titania Silver Slasher. But it's not Silver Slasher, it's Titania.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah. So that sort of takes out, at least Titania, if not both. The one I really find interesting is back on page 11, Timberwolf is kind of doing his acrobatics to try to get away from Mistmaster. And on the third one, he's still bouncing around being chased, but he bounces right into the path of Lightning Lord, who zaps him. And then the next time we see him, Timberwolf is just sort of dazed and he's sort of knocked out. And he's kind of just like floating in the air because of his Legionnaire ring.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that little bit of sequence.
Yeah, I like that too.
And there's other ones, we don't we don't have to go through all of them. People can look, Chameleon Boy and Chameleon Kid, Timberwolf and Ultra Boy are right from the cover. Sun Emperor and Wildfire. This one is a good one. So Phantom Girl on the first one is being attacked by Radiation Roy. She's further attacked on the third one, and Esperlass gets in it. So you cut to the fifth one, and Ultra Boy kicks Radiation Roy. And that makes sense because Ultra Boy and Phantom Girl are a couple. So, of course, he's like, yeah, I'm going to go protect my woman.
Mm-hmm.
And Phantom Girl kind of ducks away from Esperlass just as Block is attacking her. So it's a clever way of making them seem kind of random, but there's actually some story stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. It's just there's just so much going on the page that, like I said, that I got that sense of claustrophobia.
Yeah.
Or a tightening of the action. It's very contained, I guess. And especially on the second splash page, where the border on my copy anyway, it's all black. There's this a 1/4 inch border around or more around the entire page. Whereas the other splash pages, they go right out to the edge of the page, which I thought that's interesting. But it also ties into the sequence with Shadowlass with, like I said, the powers where she's shooting at Tyr. It kind of splashes around there, and it goes into that black border. So I thought, well, maybe that's just a little bit of artistic license going on this page. But it's a weird, like I said, it's a weird sense of movement, given how much is on the pages and, like you say, between the pages. But it's so contained in that rectangle shape with so much going on. It's a weird dichotomy to me.
Let's talk about both Cosmic Boy and Lightning Lad and Saturn, the three founders of the Legion, the Trinity of the Legion.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting how they're still continuing this thing about feeling like they are not over the hill, but just that maybe their time is sort of done. So, for instance, we get because we get the romance between Element Lad and Siobhan, and Cosmic Boy says, look, it can be hard to date a Legionnaire, but believe me, it can be done. And he knows because he's dating someone also outside of the Legion proper group, because he's dating Night Girl. And it's almost as if a way to sort of suggest, look, we can put the core members on the sidelines, and it'll be okay. And then you get the scene with Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl on page 20. They don't know what's going on. They're feeling like almost outdated a little bit, useless. And they talk about this idea about new blood. And Cosmic Boy says, look, I'm beginning to think it's time for some new blood in the Legion. And that is something that will happen in another 10, 12 issues or so. Garth's comment about him saying, we'll never leave the team. But the way that Imra says, of course, dear, feels so like she's humoring him because she probably knows. Yeah. She knows. She knows that their time is done. They're a family. They need to focus on other things. So I know what's coming, and it's nice to see the subplot starting now that they're making way for new people and putting the Trinity in another story. The Legionnaires 3, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. I always felt reading this again, though, it seems really, it makes total sense that Lightning Lad and Saturn Girl would feel that way, given that they have a baby now, that they have a family now. They are a family now. Mm-hmm. But it's Rock that kind of brings this up, right? It's not just the whole idea of, because Cosmic Boy says, I think our part in this case is over, even mine, active status or not. And then he says the thing about the new blood. I just thought that was kind of weird that Cosmic Boy would be thinking that, unless it's just a tie to the fact that, like you said, they're the trinity of the group, the old hands, the old guard. But what I object to, I guess, is, or what I'm reacting to, is that while Garth and Imra have a reason to be thinking along those lines, perhaps, I don't see it on the page as far as Rock goes.
Yeah, maybe it's just the fact that they are the elder statesmen of the group, and think of the way that Element Lad is, the way he leads the group, or you get all these new younger members, Dawnstar, Wild White Witch, Invisible Kid 2. I mean, they're sort of newish and youngish. It could just feel like they're not the ones that are being looked up to anymore, because the other Legionnaires have grown up and they're just as powerful and trustworthy, and they're just feeling like, I don't have to run this organization anymore. Maybe it could be something like that. The leader sort of giving up his. Wow, listen to those sirens. I just couldn't compete with them anymore. Still coming. Wow. Welcome to my hood. Yeah, it could just be that. I don't know. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, to see what other kind of information we get. And by the way, page 20 is not in the Tales reprint book.
Really?
Yep, they took it out because she's breastfeeding.
Okay. Yeah, when I saw that, I thought, that's different for that time period.
Yeah, it goes right from when the Legion of Supervillains get zapped to the next page where the Legion are confused. Where did they go? And then Orando disappears. And, you exactly what you said for this time period. I mean, everybody made such a big deal about Saga and the breastfeeding cover. Here we are, 1984, and they're doing it here. It's probably the first time ever in a mainstream book we saw breastfeeding. How crazy is that? And they took it out. I couldn't believe they took it out.
And that little panel popped out at me because my daughter has, she had her own child, and that is sometimes an issue where, she and I have discussed this, because, she's out having dinner or, whatever, doing some shopping and stuff, and you got to feed the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a state where there are no protections for that kind of thing, or no laws saying that you can't discriminate against breastfeeding mothers and that kind of stuff. So we also live in an area, part of the country, where that's kind of, I don't know, frowned upon for people doing that kind of stuff in public. And so my daughter's very sensitive to that. So it just got me thinking about that.
Well, what else do you have? Did we hit everything major? You got any minor points? I think it's safe to assume we're not going to do any feedback or anything like that. No, we're going to just wrap up this issue. I think so. And we'll come back next time and do some feedback.
So I think the last thing I want to talk about is, I mentioned this before, but we get that final splash page on 22, which is the transportation of Orando out of this universe, and which is a really cool scene. And like I said, then we get this final page where, like I said before, it's just really anticlimactic, considering I thought maybe they could have taken that top panel where we get the Legionnaires' faces, their reaction to the disappearance of the planet. on that same page with the disappearance, and that could have been the end of the issue. But then we get, like I said, we get that little tag on bit between Nemesis Kid and Ron Carr. But we also find out that they're in some sub part of the universe or something, right? But that could have been done in the next issue. I don't know. The tone of this issue sometimes just seems really off to me.
Yeah, when they go into like some of the more humorous things. Sort of like what you pointed out when Element Lad fainted in the issue 2.
Yeah. Exactly.
It has
just these
that
weird
same tone, yeah.
Yeah, these just weird kind of cockeyed moments that kind of take away from the story that they're trying to tell. And, part of that I'm sure is just, that's life. Things aren't always narratively clean. So why should it be that way in this book? I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. If you follow Ron Carr's little bit in this book, on page 15, the way he looks at Nemesis Kid, he really kind of feels like he just wants to be loved, like a puppy.
Yeah, I was just going to say a puppy.
Yeah. And I read his Wikipedia just because I forgot what his powers were, and they have a really funny bit about this storyline. They say he joins the Legion of Supervillains during the 5-part war between the two legions in the 1980s Legion of Superheroes series. He was not that helpful. That's what it says in his Wikipedia.
Somebody's having fun on Wikipedia.
I think that's brilliant. So then at the end when he gets punched in the eye, it's like he's like the abused girlfriend almost, which isn't funny, but
yeah.
He gets popped in the eye. But it really does say something about Nemesis Kid too. Like he's that whole comment about I am the only leader. And if you think about it, the Legion of one of the best things about Legion of Superheroes is picking a leader. And Nemesis Kid is like, we ain't gonna do that in the supervillains. There's gonna only be one, and it's gonna be me.
And to piggyback on that just real quick, I just noticed this. You have Cosmic King, I think, in the scene too. Mm-hmm. And right after Nemesis Kid pops Ron Carr in the eye, you get Cosmic King with this kind of weird look on his face, like, I'm not getting into this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, that's just kind of this weird comedic moment, sort of, just thrown in there, just a little bit. I don't know. I may not always like it, but I appreciate the effort that they're putting into the story.
Yeah, and that has to be a Giffen page because that feels like his humor.
Yeah, you're right. It does.
Yeah. Yeah, and we mentioned before, that I thought the reveal of Nemesis Kid was kind of a cheat in this.
Yeah.
Especially because if you go back and you look at the cliffhanger for issue 2, they really do design whoever that person is to look like Tyrock. They give him white gloves. They give him little booties. I mean, he does look like it could be Tyrock. And I know a lot of people in the letter columns, they thought that that's who it was. But then you go to this issue and they're like, we're just going to tell you who it is.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, wait, what? That's no fun.
Well, they have a lot of story to cram in there, Peter.
I guess his motive is interesting. I thought, his motive, he doesn't just want to have power. He wants to have enough authority so that his power never has to be exercised. And I thought, where does that sound familiar in today's politics? I was like, I read that and was like, yeah, I understand that, I guess. Not that I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you mentioned that must be a Giffen page. One last thing I'll point out. I wonder if this was a Giffen page or if this is Lytle homaging Giffen, because on page 18 we get that appearance by a very famous Marvel character, or suggested that it's a Marvel character, because Chameleon Boy changes and punches his counterpart, Chameleon Chief, and it's the Thing's arm. I like that.
That's got to be Giffen. He does. Yeah,
because you mentioned that before. I think in one of the previous episodes where Giffen liked to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, he really did. The only other thing that I just want to quick mention is we already did sort of, but like the interlude with R.J. Brand and Colossal Boy's parents, and they're talking about when they're going to have to pick a new president. So it's not even an election. The computer just picks a new president. And R.J. Brand says, oh, I'm going to have a lot of trouble because with a new president comes a lot of new questions, and maybe they might try to control the Legion. And I love the line that R.J. Brand says in response to that a new president might make trouble for the Legionnaires. And Marty Allen says, do you really think that's unavoidable? And he says, lady, I have cheated death, and as for taxes, I've paid fewer than any man I know. With credits and gall enough, anything is avoidable. I was like, oh, he's Trump. He's like a philanthropist, but yet one that has like a heart of gold. But but realistically, that is a subplot. That's a subplot that's going to play out, like the whole especially in the 5 years later Legion, how political that book is.
Oh yeah.
But I like that little bit of, I said earlier, it's a Chris Claremont kind of thing. Just drop one little thing in, and maybe they'll get back to it. I can't imagine the whiteboard or the scorecard they must have had, like keeping all the stuff in track. But that's an interesting. I like that scene. I'm glad they threw it in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a bit of foreshadowing too for the Universo storyline, right? I'm thinking.
Oh yeah. I think we both had the same feeling about the book, but still were able to get some interesting comments out of it.
Mm-hmm. Wait, there is one more thing not tied to this book, this story that I wanted to point out. Just looking at my notes. So in the letter column, considering what time of year that we're at, Peter, right now as we record this, I thought it was kind of apropos. The letter column hints at a Legion of Superheroes Halloween story with some DC Magic characters that I don't believe ever materialized.
Yeah, that doesn't sound familiar.
Because that would be, I would buy the crap out of that book.
I know they do a Legion Halloween backup story in a later Tales book, so I wonder if maybe that. But I don't think it has. It doesn't have guest stars though, not that I remember.
Oh, and also the Meanwhile column in this issue references new talent showcase artists. Two of them being on Legion of Superheroes books, and that is, of course, Steve Lytle on this book, and Carl Kessel on the Tales book. So interesting connections there.
Yeah, I know he was inking Terry Schumacher for a while, so I'll have to see if he actually took over as penciler, but he's mostly known as an inker. Speaking of the Tales book, real quick, which cover do you like? Do you like Legion of Superheroes cover to the Baxter number 3, or do you like the Paris Cullens cover to 328 where the Legion are rushing to the Legion of Supervillains?
Oh no, I prefer the Giffen drawn cover.
Yeah.
Even though it's a ton of characters on the page and it's just really busy and whatnot. I just like the look of it much better.
Yeah.
And since we're talking about this, have you noticed that Wildfire plays a prominent role in at least two of these covers?
So far, yeah.
It's like, is Wildfire like a favorite of Giffen's? Do we know this?
I don't know if it is or isn't, but I mean, he is no stranger to playing favorites. So
yeah,
he's like, I want to draw the characters I like.
Well, when you got 20 plus characters, I guess you would want to do that.
Yeah. All right. We done?
I think we're done.
Yeah. I hope that wasn't too much of an overload for listeners. 2 books like that, but
I can't imagine that would happen too often.
Eric and I are talking about how to handle spin-offs and annuals and things like that in general, and we have a pretty good notion of what we're going to do. I think we might have mentioned before, or if not, every numbered episode is going to correlate to the actual number of the issue. So episode 4 will be about issue 4. Episode 5 will be about issue 5, and so on and so forth. And then, when we hit upon when we have to sort of spin off, we'll fill you in at that time. What the plan is, and you'll know just by the download. But that way you know what issue we're reading by the episode number. We're going to keep that consistent.
Then we just have to figure out what we're going to do after, 63? 64? Whichever that is?
Legion Project Volume 2, baby.
Oh, there we go.
We just reboot. Legion,
perfect.
Legion Project Rebirth.
That is so perfect, considering how many times the Legion itself reboots. So
Exactly.
Good job, Peter.
Thank you. All right, let's say goodbye.
All right.
Where can they reach you?
Let's see. If people want to find out or listen to my show, please go to longboxreview.com. And if you'd like to leave feedback about this episode or anything else, you can always email me at longboxreview@gmail.com. Peter, where can they find you?
Peter at thedailyrios.com. You can go to the website, thedailyrios.com. And please subscribe to both our shows on iTunes and wherever else our shows are. Mine's on Google Play and Stitcher. Where's yours at?
Same, Google Play, Stitcher, some other ones that I've forgotten. I try to get my show out there wherever I can. Yeah,
exactly. And we did, like I said, we did get feedback for this episode. It's just, we knew that this one was going to be a little chunky, so we'll save it for the next episode. But we are responding to the feedback. It's not like you're going to email and you'll never hear from us. We will respond in an email, and then we'll also, pick and choose and drop some stuff on the actual episode itself.
Peter, do we want to just put a blanket call out there for people who do send us feedback that unless we are told otherwise, that we may include that in a future episode or excerpts of that?
Sure. Yeah, if they don't want it to be on the air, they can just say, please don't read on the air. But my hope is that they want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. I just wanted to let people know that that's our intent, is that we would bring up certain parts of the feedback, if not all of it, here on mic, unless people don't want us to.
So you know how you came up with a catchphrase last time? That was the Legion catchphrase, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of how to make it personal.
I figured you would.
It's the same thing. It's long live the Legion, but it's long live the Legion Project.
There we go.
We just keep it going. How's that?
Great.
I'm so tired. I gotta go to bed. So there you have it. Let's say it together. Ready? Go.
Long live the Legion Project. We'll work on it.
Yeah, we'll work on it. All right. Thanks for listening.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.